We're going to start this morning with midterm elections. Now with control of Congress at stake, this is shaping up to be a pivotal and busy week in several key states.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the focus today is on Georgia, of course. Early voting begins today in that key battleground state. And there's also a debate between the two candidates for governor. And, of course, later this week, early voting will also get underway in North Carolina and Nevada. And with just 22 days to go, there's a lot to dig into. So let's bring in NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, good morning.
Good morning.
I want to start with the Georgia Senate race. Democrat incumbent Raphael Warnock facing Republican challenger Herschel Walker. Two debated on Friday, and that definitely made some headlines. But there was another debate yesterday. Walker, a no-show. That race getting a lot of national attention, and the control of the Senate, of course, hangs in the balance. So walk us through where things stand as of now, especially after these last two debates.
Yeah, it is a really close contest, Morgan, and I wouldn't call the Georgia Senate race the most important when it comes to which party ends up controlling the Senate after the November elections, but it's one of the three most important. And the reason I say that is that Senate control really kind of almost hinges right now on which party wins two of the three contests of Georgia, of Pennsylvania, and Nevada. And so you end up having Raphael Warnock the incumbent, and if Democrats are able to win in Georgia and they're able to win in Pennsylvania, they're going to hold on to control of the United States Senate. So Republicans need to basically win Nevada or win one of Pennsylvania or Georgia. And those are the stakes right now. And as I mentioned earlier, the polling indicates Raphael Warnock with a very small lead in this state that we know came down to just 10 to 11,000 votes in the 2020 presidential election, one where Warnock ended up winning by a very narrow margin in his runoff in 2021. And so we are all really, I think, expecting a very close contest in one of the most consequential presidential states, but also one of the most consequential states going to determine which party controls the Senate in November.
Absolutely. Mark, let's talk about, of course, what this really all comes down to, the voters and what they care about. You know, as we've seen the scandal sort of unfolding with Herschel Walker, it hasn't necessarily seemed, at least with the reporting our colleagues have been doing, to have made a huge difference to people in terms of if they were going to vote for him or not. What do we know about that now, and what issues do we know about these particular voters in Georgia caring about?
Yeah, Savannah, it almost comes down to the race on two different campaigns that Democrats and Republicans are running. And we're seeing Republicans across the country and also in Georgia run races where they are attacking President Biden's handling of the economy. They're noting inflation. They're talking about crime. Democrats are talking about a completely different issue matrix. They're talking about abortion. They are talking about threats to democracy. And, you know, the question really kind of comes down to which issue matrix is going to be more potent. Now, our polling ends up showing that still the economy really does matter when you add up both the economy and the cost of living to people. But it is striking to me this played out in Friday night's debate between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. It's playing out in all the polling that I've seen, that the parties really have two different issues that they're all kind of running against each other. And Democrats have their strengths when it comes to abortion and threats to democracy, and Republicans are playing offense when it comes to the economy.
Yeah, Mark, real quick here. Another former President Obama announced he's going to be visiting Georgia and Michigan later this month to support Democratic candidates in those states. Can you explain the role that he's expected to play as Democrats try to keep control of Congress here?
Yeah, it's very important party surrogate, Morgan. And, you know, it is interesting. We ended up seeing President Biden hit the road going to places like California and Oregon. But former President Barack Obama is going into some of the most important battlegrounds, as you mentioned, to be able to go into Georgia, Michigan, but also Wisconsin as well. And we're going to see later this week President Biden go to stump for John Fetterman in the Pennsylvania Senate race. But it is striking to me that Barack Obama is going into more of the pivotal Senate battlegrounds as opposed to President Biden right now. And sometimes it's a whole lot easier being an ex-president than a current president. You're often a whole lot more popular, Morgan.
All right. So much more to come. Mark, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. We'll be watching. Now, while there are a number of issues candidates are pushing to get voters to the polls, two big ones are inflation and the January 6th investigation.
Meet the press moderator Chuck Todd discussed those topics with his guests this weekend. And here's some highlights on this week's Meet the Press Compressed.
We have a majority of economists now that believe a recession in the next 12 months is likely. First of all, do you think the Federal Reserve is currently helping or hurting the situation?
I think they're hurting the situation. I think that it is wrong to be saying that the way we're going to deal with inflation is by lowering wages and increasing unemployment. That is not what we should be doing. So this inflation thing is a real issue. It is a global issue. But at a time when working families are struggling and the people on top are doing phenomenally well, I don't think you go after working people.
If you serve all 6 years, the entire time you're in the Senate, you will not join either party's caucus, giving them officially your vote.
No, Chuck, I will not. I will maintain my independence. I will not caucus with either side. And by the way, Chuck, I think that this will give Utah added value of influence in the Senate that it just doesn't have. I think that we've seen well enough over the past year or two, especially, that the senators in the chamber who are willing to act with greater independence, serving their constituents, standing up to party bosses, standing up to extremist factions and special interest groups, they have the most influence in the chamber. They're more influential, I think, even than the party bosses. And I want that for Utah, and I know we'll do a great deal of good with it serving this way.
Are we going to see this report? I know we're not going to see the report before Election Day now, and we could have a debate about whether the voters should sort of see this before Election Day. But are we going to see a report before the end of the calendar year? I mean, you're under a clock here, so I assume you have to turn in something to us, right?
You will see a report before the end of the calendar year, but let me just say that this isn't about the next election this fall. This is about whether the sanctity of American elections here on out will be marred with violence and with fraud, because in a case where that happened, these people were not held accountable. And so that's the purpose of this committee, is to ensure that we tell the full truth, allow government officials to make changes to the system to improve our guardrails, allow the American people to make better decisions about who they elect, and also to allow DOJ to encourage DOJ to do their job.
And our thanks to Chuck Todd for that report. Still no word on when the January 6th committee will formally issue their subpoena to former President Donald Trump.
And turning now to the seditious conspiracy trial against Oath Keeper founder Stewart Rhodes and 4 of his associates. Today begins week 3 of the prosecution's case against them as the Department of Justice attempts to prove they conspired in an effort to stop the transfer of power following the 2020 election. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley joins us now from Washington, D.C. with more. Hey, Ryan, always great to see you. So just tell us about these major takeaways so far, and what do you think we'll see from prosecution this week?
Sure. So we've heard a lot from the FBI special agents about a lot of the messages that were sent leading up to this attack. We've also heard a lot including from a former member of the Oath Keepers, about the quick reaction force that was kept outside of D.C. at a hotel. He said it was the most weapons he'd seen in one location since his time in the U.S. military, and that was testimony we got last week. Coming up this week, I expect more testimony from some of these FBI agents, and what we're sort of waiting on is some of these other cooperating witnesses in this case. There are a number of Oath Keepers who have already pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy and have agreed to cooperate with the government, and we could expect their testimony coming up, including from one individual who says that he, on the night of January 6th, was in the hotel suite with Stewart Rhodes when Stewart Rhodes tried to get in touch with former President Trump and talk to some sort of Trump intermediary who had the president's ear. He never got directly in contact with Trump, but we've heard a lot about the open letters that Stewart Rhodes wrote in the lead up to January 6th, encouraging Donald Trump to call upon the Oath Keepers and help stop the peaceful transfer of power.
Ryan, I mentioned that this is the 3rd week now, and we know prosecution is coming to the end of their presentation. Do we have any idea when they will rest their case and then we start to hear from the defense?
We don't quite know yet. They do have a lot of witnesses left. We might see this go into the next week after this week, just from the prosecution, and then we can see probably the defense take up their case. And what the defense is going to try to argue, many of them, is that they were some sort of protective measure, that they're going to basically say that they assisted officers in some scenarios, and say that this was just a lot of basic bloviating and a lot of bark and not a lot of bite coming from the Oath Keepers, essentially.
The other thing that we'll be watching for is we do know that the Oath Keepers founder, Stewart Rhodes himself, is expected to testify. Talk about how pivotal that could be, depending on what we hear, and also, is that a risk?
It's definitely a risk for sure. I think, especially for some of the other defendants, it's something that could go either way for them. He's going to take a very unique posture, I think, in this case, and essentially argue that he was trying to follow the bounds of the law and was thinking that he was only, if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act, was he going to do anything? It's a very sort of bizarre a defense that we see coming forward, and he's done a media interview during the trial, which is also not something that most lawyers would recommend. Savannah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ryan Riley, thank you as always.
And turning now to the war in Ukraine, officials say at least 3 people have been killed in a so-called kamikaze drone attack on the capital city of Kyiv. Multiple explosions rocked the city center early this morning, forcing many people to seek shelter. I want to get straight out to NBC News correspondent Cal Perry, who joins us live from Kyiv. Cal, good morning. Just 1 week after Russia launched strikes on the capital city, it's now being targeted yet again. So where do things stand on the ground where you are today?
So, yeah, no, it was about 6:45 in the morning when we heard those first wave of explosions. There was about 5, 6 explosions and then a second wave about an hour and 15 minutes later. And the distinct sound, Morgan, of low-flying drones. They sound basically like mopeds. That's how people here describe them. That is exactly how they sound. There was another series of explosions, and it is an apartment building that took the worst of the damage. I can tell you this neighborhood has now been hit 4 days in a row. And they continuously are pounding the same area, looking and trying to hit these infrastructure targets. Now, the government had warned people that the Russian military was moving from these cruise missiles to these drones, but I don't think anybody expected the level of damage that we're seeing from these drones. The other thing that we saw this morning that we have not seen since the beginning of this war is people using small arms fire, machine gun fire to try to shoot these drones out of the air. Still a very dangerous situation, of course, because Morgan, these things can still impact in residential areas. And as the case was, we saw this morning, they start large fires and do a great deal of damage.
Yeah, the danger incredibly real right there in the city. Cal, we're also watching the fighting in the eastern Donbass region. It appeared to intensify as well over the weekend. Pro-Russian separatists who have been in control of Donetsk city since 2014 say Ukrainian forces shelled the administrative building over the weekend. What have we learned about that?
Yeah, and the heaviest fighting happening in and around the city of Kherson, as you said, in the south, what they call the fire line, the line of contact, as the government puts it here. 30 villages, we understand, coming under sustained bombardment from the Russians. It is these gains that are being made in the eastern part of the country and in the southern part of the country by Ukrainian forces that leads government officials here to believe it is why Russia is lashing out, using these cheaper but very crude and very deadly drones, firing them intentionally into residential areas. The theory being that Russia's trying to break the back of the civilian population. Don't expect that to happen. People here have been rallying around these strikes, saying it's only going to encourage them further on the battlefield, Morgan.
No doubt. Cal, I want to bring up another flashpoint location here. The Zaporizhzhia power plant has been cut off from external power yet again, according to Ukraine's energy agency. So what is the situation there for really the largest nuclear power plant in all of Europe?
It's a deteriorating situation, both inside the plant and surrounding area. Inside the plant, you have Ukrainian workers under Russian occupation being tortured and being killed. That, according to senior government officials here that we have interviewed. And now you have word that shelling has cut off the power to the station itself. So they've moved to generator power. The problem there is they only have 9 days worth of diesel fuel for those generators. They have to get the power lines back online, or you could have a serious problem at that plant, guys.
Yeah, serious problem, putting it lightly there. Cal, thank you so much.
Yeah. Turning now to Iran, where at least 4 people are dead and dozens more injured after a fire broke out inside the notorious Evin prison in Tehran. That's according to state media outlets. NBC News has not yet verified the cause of the fire. It broke out overnight, though, and caused widespread panic in the neighborhood surrounding the facility. Gunshots and screams can be heard in several videos recorded just outside of the prison. The outbreak comes as nationwide protests continue in the country. Sunday marked exactly 1 month since 22-year-old Mahsa Amini died in the hospital 3 days after being arrested by the morality police. Let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis for more. He's a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities. Lieutenant, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us on this. So I want to start just with some background on this prison. Tell us who's housed there and what's its reputation like?
Yeah, this is one of the more notorious prisons in Tehran, where it's actually a big mix of different things. There's just what they call regular thieves. There's economic violators, and then there's lots of political prisoners. And in fact, some of these in the recent crackdowns that you've mentioned here have been housed there, and others, dissidents and filmmakers and others have been held there and tortured. There's been leaked video over the last couple of years, especially. It's been very embarrassing to the government. But by all means, it is a very terrible place to be incarcerated.
This all comes, of course, as violent protests in Iran continue. And we don't know many details of this fire yet, but we do know hundreds of prisoners were arrested during those demonstrations. We also know protesters showed up outside the prison as this was unfolding. Some of those prisoners are also U.S. citizens. How is the U.S. handling the situation?
Well, the United States, of course, is making diplomatic demarches, and they're demanding that especially any American citizens be actually released, but certainly taken care of. And actually, I have a particular source that has some knowledge of inside the regime that tells me this morning that apparently that this was a fire that was broken out inside intentionally to draw firemen in, and then they wanted to escape. Once the firemen came in, they actually had into a fight. They got some of their weapons from some of the security forces, and then they tried to break out. And then apparently lots of the supporters of these prisoners called the family members, and that's what you saw gathering there. Over 100 family members demanding that their family members be taken out.
As we mentioned, many neighbors reported hearing gunshots. You can hear them in some of those videos. I mean, this is obviously a distressing situation for the surrounding neighborhood, in addition to the protests that have been happening nightly as well. Protesters, as I just mentioned, also made their way shortly to the prison after the fire began, so that was happening outside as well. Are you concerned that this fire and then the surrounding activity could lead to more violence?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely the concern, because what you're seeing, especially with this Masa Amini situation here, that's already lit a fire under what has been a burgeoning upset and a protest movement within Iran. Over years, they've been upset with the regime, and especially since Raisi has come to power, they've tried to crack down even more, which is just not going to work, because all they're doing is inflaming the situation. And I think that things like this, especially when it gets about how the government has been, abusing their people, that it's just going to cause more outrage. And I think the regime is really in trouble right now.
Yeah, and we're certainly talking about it around the world as we see these images of these brave and strong women standing up for what they believe is right. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And now let's get a check on your morning news now weather, as parts of the country might be pulling out their winter gear.
Yeah, they might be. Meteorologist Michelle Grossman joins us now with the forecast. Michelle, good morning. Always good to visit y'all from Texas, because at least it feels like fall here.
Yeah, you get a little fall. That's
nice. Not bad.
Morgan, I was thinking of you this morning because you're going to feel like fall, too. Even down to Texas, we're seeing some cooler air. You're not going to be freezing like some spots. Some spots are going to be freezing. Some are going to pull out the winter boots, not just the winter coats, because we're looking at snow falling, but certainly Texas will feel that fall coolness finally. So we're looking at freeze alert. 66 million people impacted by a freeze alert, whether it's a freeze watch, that's in the purple. We also have freeze warnings. So it spreads from the Rockies to the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, portions of the Northeast, all the way down to the Gulf Coast states, the Central Plains as well. And here is this cooler. I do want to point out Dallas, 69 degrees. It's been so warm. We're going to be 9 degrees below normal today, 59 in Lubbock. But look at Minneapolis, 36 degrees today. That's 21 degrees below average for this time of year. Chicago, barely into the 40s. St. Louis, 48 degrees. And Pittsburgh, you're going to be chilly, too, at 50 degrees. So as we go throughout tonight into tomorrow morning, we are going to be waking up to temperatures in the teens, record lows across the northern plains, the Ohio Valley, portions of the Central Plains into portions of the Tennessee Valley. Chattanooga, 33 degrees tomorrow morning. The record there is 32. Aberdeen, 10 degrees. The record of 12 degrees, likely breaking that record. And Rochester, we're looking at 20. As we wake up on Tuesday morning. Then later on Tuesday, not going very far, we're going to see that cool air spreading into the mid-Atlantic, also the Northeast. New York City, 57 tomorrow. That's 7 degrees below normal. Houston, 69. New Orleans, 66. And Tallahassee, 68 degrees. Wednesday morning, another chilly morning. Temperatures in the 20s, the 30s. Austin, 38 degrees as you wake up Wednesday morning. The record is 39 there. New Orleans, 45. And Jacksonville, you're going to feel the chill, too, 46 degrees. We're going to rebound slightly as we head throughout the later part of the week. New York City, 57 on Thursday, 62 on Friday. Raleigh, 62 degrees on Thursday, and back to near 70 degrees on Friday. So we do have winter alerts. That's for portions of Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, because we could see up to 8 inches of snow. It's going to be that heavy, wet snow falling, and it's going to be breezy, too, with winds gusting up to 35 miles per hour. So we are getting a winter preview for sure in some spots. It's all due to this big storm system that's swirling near the Great Lakes. We have a trailing cold front that's going to bring the chance of rain along that cold front. So we'll see that storm system sitting over the northern Great Lakes. It's going to bring rain, wintry mix from Wisconsin to New York City. Then it doesn't move very far as we go throughout tomorrow. We'll see that system lingering into the middle part of the week. 35-mile-per-hour winds, rain, and the wintry mix continues. Where you see the blue and the pinks, the pink is a mix of rain and snow. The blue is snow. So we're forecasting anywhere from 2 to 4 inches in portions of the UP and Michigan, but certainly could see up to 8 inches of snow. And we're looking at snow in portions of the Ohio Valley, also western Pennsylvania. I think it sort of is that time of year where we're making that transition into the later parts of fall weather and also wintry weather. So the rainfall forecast also looking at heavy rains in portions of New England along the Great Lakes where you see those brighter colors. That's where we're expecting the heaviest rain. Also could see strong to severe storms in portions of the Carolinas, Florida, and southern Texas. We could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Back to you guys.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.